Welcome to the Damage Report, Lockdown Edition, I suppose. I'm John Adarola, and thank you for joining me on this live stream, and in my home, actually, because you might have noticed that things look a little bit different. No, this is not a radical redesign of the TDR studio that incorporates far more board games than in the past. No, we are doing what we can. We're doing our part, like many people are, to help to flatten the curve, to, encourage social distancing in work as well as in other areas of our life, and be a part of the solution to the current pandemic that we're dealing with here in the US and around the world. And so we want to be mindful of the precautions that have been, given out as medical advice from professionals. And so in response to all of that, we're going to be changing things, obviously. But I do want to reassure you, I'm going to give you tons of specifics. I want to reassure you that we will be continuing to produce and provide content for you, both to keep you updated on what's going on with the pandemic, other news that doesn't have anything to do with it, and also to make sure that you, especially if you are self-isolating, that you're not alone. Right now, and certainly in the future, our lives are going to be different for some time, but to the extent that we can make it so that some normality continues, that something that we've grown accustomed to is still there, I think that it's important that we do that. And myself and the rest of the people at TYT definitely want to make sure that we do that. And so we're obviously not in our regular space, but the Damage Report is going to continue, although the format is, of course, going to be different as well. We're adapting, and we're in this with you. Expect that we're going to do some news here today. Things will probably develop over time. We made this change with relatively little notice, and so we're going to have to adapt to any technical issues and things like that, but we're also interested in your feedback, so feel free to provide that too. So here's what you need to know in the short term. You're definitely going to want to subscribe to the Damage Report on YouTube and hit the bell, that new thing that you kind of need to do if you want to get notifications of our videos, but especially of our live streams as well. There's still going to be a lot of live content, and so if you subscribe and hit the bell, you'll have access to that, and you'll get notified every time I go live. Additionally, you're probably going to want to follow me on Twitter, because I will be tweeting, and at the Damage Report on Twitter, we'll be tweeting in advance of these live streams so that you know when they're going to come. Hitting the like button on the Damage Report page on Facebook will give you updates of new videos posted there, just, to cover all of your bases. And we're going to have new videos on demand basically throughout the day. As of right now, we're not going to have effectively the same hour-long show to start off the day, but we will do multiple live streams that you can take part in, both to watch, keep track of what's going on, but also to take part. This is going to be, in fact, more interactive than the show generally is. So you can do that. We're going to have the full 1 hour on demand will be put together and available on tyt.com, on the app, all of that. And so if you're used to consuming our content in that way, we're going to do everything we can to make sure that that continues the same as always. If you're viewing this on Pluto TV, Roku, Xfinity X1, Flex, Zumo, YouTube TV, any of that sort of thing, we are going to have a new 1 hour episode that'll air daily at 1 a.m. Eastern Time, 10 p.m. Pacific Time. I know that's kind of late, so don't worry. It will also be re-airing the next morning at 1 p.m. Pacific, 10 a.m. That's 1 p.m. Eastern, 10 a.m. Pacific, and 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific. So we'll be doing live stuff that you can get access to. We'll be clipping out bits of content for YouTube that you can watch on demand if you're interested in seeing specific stories, but also if you're a member, if you watch on one of those linear platforms, that will be available to you as well. And, be advised that we're adapting as you're adapting, and so we may have changes as we go along, and, we hope that you continue to watch and support us as we do our best to support you as well. So a little bit later on, if you have any questions, I can certainly answer those too, but that's a basic overview of how we're adapting to this. And we're gonna see what happens.
We need to talk about a relatively new show called the Republic, or UNFTR. As a Young Turks fan, you already know that the government, the media, and corporations are constantly peddling lies that serve the interests of the rich and powerful. But now there's a podcast dedicated to unraveling those lies, debunking the conventional wisdom. In each episode of the Republic, or UNFTR, the host delves into a different historical episode or topic that's generally misunderstood or purposely obfuscated by the so-called powers that be, featuring in-depth research, razor-sharp commentary, and just the right amount of vulgarity, the UNFTR podcast takes a sledgehammer to what you thought you knew about some of the nation's most sacred historical cows. But don't just take my word for it. The New York Times described UNFTR as consistently compelling and educational, aiming to challenge conventional wisdom and upend the historical narratives that were taught in school. For as the great philosopher Yoda once put it, "You must unlearn what you have learned." And that's true whether you're in Jedi training or you're uprooting and exposing all the propaganda and disinformation you've been fed over the course of your lifetime. So search for UNFDR in your podcast app today and get ready to get informed, angered, and entertained all at the same time.
Obviously, yesterday's election, and we'll get into the air quotes there, did not go how, I think I or maybe you ideally would have had it gone. And we'll get to the negative points. But there was one positive event, and that was Marie Newman's win over Dan Lipinski, which we have been sort of hoping for, rooting for some time now, but it was by no means something that was assured to happen. And in the end, even though she did win, it was still a close election. So this is Illinois' 3rd district, and Marie Newman ended up with 47.1% of the vote to Dan Lipinski's 44.8%. That is just less than a 3,000 vote gap. So that was close, but the fact that it was that close, I think, should reassure us that in these sorts of races, the hard work that we do is necessary. So Marie Newman won. Jessica Cisneros narrowly lost by just a couple of points. In both of those cases, it's just a few thousand votes. That's how close these things can be. And so, if you're taking part in volunteering, making calls, donating, all of that stuff for these sorts of races, it does actually matter. Sometimes it can very much be the difference. Just because it's such good news, I want to give you a little bit of what she had to say. She tweeted in response to the call being made yesterday saying, "I am bursting with pride and gratitude for the amazing coalition that helped bring about much needed change in our district. We're going to work together to lower healthcare costs, to fight climate change, and to build an economy that works for everyone." Now, bear in mind, this is the primary, but it's expected that she's going to win the general election, assuming we have a general election. Dan Lipinski back in 2018 won the general election by 48 points. So this is a deep blue state, and that's another reason why Dan Lipinski had no business holding this seat in the first place. In this blue of a district, you should have a hardcore, awesome Democrat that other Democrats should be working to emulate. And hopefully we will have that very soon. I'm gonna continue. By the way, I am seeing the super chats. I will go through and respond to some of those in just a little bit. Now, this is one of the races that groups like the Justice Democrats were pushing hard for, and we have a comment from the executive director of the JDs, Alexandra Rojas, who's been on the show numerous times. She said that this win sends a message to every Democrat incumbent that if you don't vote like a Democrat, you will be held accountable. And look, they have to be feeling pretty good. I mean, maybe not nationally, but in terms of these races, like, their support definitely mattered, definitely played a huge part in Marie Newman's win. And they just came so close against Henry Cuellar with Jessica Cisneros. So, nobody, I think, has said, nobody thought that it was going to be easy to elect a bunch of Justice Democrats, but they've been making great progress in 2018, obviously, and we continue to reap the benefits of that. And now, hopefully, we'll have some additional ones as well. So if this is a race that you weren't necessarily paying close attention to before, I just want to give you a little bit of an idea of who Dan Lipinski was. So he's a Democrat, bear in mind. He declined to endorse President Obama back in 2012. So it wouldn't even matter. If it was his first race, it still makes no sense that he's endorsing him. But this is the incumbent Democratic president running for re-election. He sets out. He's not interested. Dan Lipinski voted against the ACA and opposed same-sex marriage until the Supreme Court ruled to make it legal in 2015. So he held out as long as he possibly could. And just as a little bit of background, just give it a bit of an idea of where he's coming from. Lipinski has represented the 3rd District of Illinois since 2005, when he took over for his father, Bill Lipinski, who first won the seat in 1982. Now, look, this is American politics. That's a thing that happens. People inherit seats. We have effectively a sort of loose aristocracy in some seats. But this is a guy who, he was handed this seat. It's deep blue. Primaries were the only way that he was ever going to lose. And so he became, I guess, who he actually was. A horrible, horrible Democrat that never should have received the institutional backing that he did. Now, in this race, he received a little bit less of that. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, of course, has insisted that there shouldn't be a litmus test on topics like abortion for Democrat candidates. In this cycle, while she visited the campaign offices for instance, Henry Cuellar, she did not lend the same assistance to Lipinski. And so, like, it took until this race, not in 2018, but this race, for finally them to say, you know what, I think maybe a line has to be drawn. That if you go too far, we're not going to support you. But take a look at those two races, because she was very supportive of Henry Cuellar, going and campaigning for him, helping him to raise money to fend off Jessica Cisneros. So Dan Lipinski is a horrible Democrat, admittedly. He's anti-choice. Look, if you're going to turn against one of your incumbents, that's a pretty good reason to do it. But that should hardly be the only reason. Cuellar votes with Trump like 60-70% of the time, depending on the month that you look at it. It's a horrible, horrible Democrat. And yet he still received the support of the Democratic Party and indeed its figurehead in Nancy Pelosi. So anyway, look, it would be an even better day if we'd knocked out both of them. But Marie Newman, she fought long and hard for literally years now to take down one of the worst incumbent Democrats in the House. And so hopefully she's going to win in November, and then we're going to have another fighter in the House to join those who won back in 2018. So a little bit of good news at the very least. Yesterday was the Democratic primary election in a number of states, not as many as had been planned, because thankfully some governors were responsible and postponed the actual in-person voting and allowed for, a month longer of absentee balloting, mail voting, all of that. But it did proceed in some states. And look, I'm going to keep it real. As a supporter of Bernie Sanders, it did not go at all as I would have hoped in any of those states. So starting with Arizona, Joe Biden was able to win 43.6% of the vote to Bernie Sanders' 31.6%. So a gap of about, it's 12 points basically. And I would not necessarily have predicted that a couple of weeks ago, especially with Bernie Sanders doing as amazingly well as he did in the Nevada caucuses. Arizona didn't go great. Now, it was a smaller margin than in the other states. And in terms of the actual delegates that'll be allocated from Arizona, Biden ends up getting 26 to Bernie Sanders' 22, at least as of what we have right now. So not a huge difference there, but that combined with the other states that were called earlier on yesterday, Illinois and Florida, which we'll get to, it allows him to say that he swept all of the states, which is, like, we have to accept reality. We have to point that out. In, Florida, it was a gigantic win for Joe Biden. He's at 62% to Bernie Sanders' 23%, 8% going for Mike Bloomberg. I'm assuming early voting or just those, diehard Bloomberg fans. And look, in terms of the pledged delegates out of that, Biden in the end is going to end up getting like 90 or 100 more from it than Bernie Sanders will, which is big. That was one of the biggest remaining states going into Tuesday. It's the size basically of Texas in terms of delegates. It's half the size of California, which Bernie did win. But with the fact that Biden was already leading, Bernie needs as many delegates as possible. And so that Florida result was not great. And finally, we have Illinois. Joe Biden at 59 to Bernie Sanders 36, and a gap of probably about 35 delegates extra going to Biden off of that. In the end, as of right now, it looks like Joe Biden's at 1153 in delegates to Bernie Sanders' 874. And you can see down there that Elizabeth Warren and Mike Bloomberg were able to get some delegates. That would have been important if we had a contested convention, but it is not looking like that is what's going to happen at this point. So look, 3 states, 3 disappointing outcomes, nested inside of a disappointing choice to go forward with any of these elections. Look, we talked about this in our live coverage last night. None of this should have happened. None of it. I mean, the individual governors should have done should have done what's right. They should have been responsible, and they should have postponed it. I mean, we're postponing literally everything else in this country. The idea that the one thing that you have to go forward in is the thing that gets the most people together and forces them to congregate, possibly for hours at a time. Like I keep saying, if it's not safe to sit in a Denny's, it's not safe to stand in line to vote for multiple hours, and yet they pushed forward. And look, we speculated a lot about why exactly that is. I have my theories. I'm sure you do as well. I don't think that the reason they pushed forward with it is just, a steadfast love of democracy and a need for things to continue. I don't think that that's why it is. I think it was convenient electorally. I think that some people care more about trying to finish this primary, to wind it down as fast as possible. I think that that was very important to some people, more important than making sure that people are safe and that they don't expose themselves potentially to the coronavirus at the exact time that all of these same officials are saying, we got to flatten that curve, we got to be responsible, we got to accept that some things are going to change to make sure that as few people die as possible. And they went forward with it. So let's talk about the consequences of that. One election judge in Illinois told the Chicago Sun-Times that turnout was lower than she's seen in 2 decades, with about a third of Illinois voters claiming they were, quote, very concerned that they or a family member would contract the virus, according to an AP survey. That is only the most reasonable thing I've heard in my entire life, basically. Yeah, I would be very concerned to congregate in that sort of... I mean, look, people are worried about people passing them on the street. They're worried about going to a supermarket and passing by a few people. Imagine standing in a crowd. Yeah, I would be worried too. The New York Times reported that overall turnout was less than half what it was in the 2016 primary. And even that, by the way, like, look, some of those people, they just care so much that they want to vote. And on some level, I respect that. I admire that. But I don't want people to put themselves at risk, and I don't want them to be put into a position where they have to. And so we can be frustrated with any individual choice that potentially exposes them or other people to the disease, certainly. But the authorities are the ones that are supposed to be responsible. They're supposed to set the example that we follow. And in this case, they set an example, but not one that I think we should follow. Turnout also declined in some Florida counties where polling locations were changed at the last minute. But NBC News estimated turnout at 2 million in the state overall, up from 1.7 million in 2016. So Florida actually increased, but that might be because almost half of Florida voters, nearly 1.1 million, participated in early voting or mail-in voting. That's 20% higher than 2016. So their overall turnout is higher, but not the day of in-person turnout. But still, especially Florida, like what is the average age in Florida? What's the average age of likely voters in Florida? And still, at the very least, hundreds of thousands of them, many hundreds of thousands, queued up and stood in line. And will we ever know any individual or any number of people who were exposed to coronavirus because of those lines in those states? Not necessarily. There will always be some plausible deniability. It's difficult to know exactly when people got infected. But with those numbers, you can guarantee that it happened. And considering the older population, both for the voters and for the people working at polls, you can also guarantee that someone is going to die as a result of this choice. That will be a consequence. Will there be any consequences for those who pushed forward with the elections? Probably not. These sorts of powerful people never suffer any consequences for what they do. But when you see someone like Tom Perez on the news saying, I'm not going to step in, it's not our place, it's the states, we're not going to interfere, and then like a day or two after saying all states should go forward, I mean, we know where they stand on this. Now look, should we accept these results? I think for any individual, I guess that's on you. I find them to be at best questionable and unrepresentative. Not universally bad. I mean, we talked earlier about Marie Newman. She managed to win. I guess that's a good result. But what would the turnout have been like had everyone been free to vote in a way that was, safe and accessible? I don't know. I don't know that any of these states necessarily would have flipped. I mean, the closest was Arizona, and it was still about 14 points. I don't know that would have been different. But that's literally, like, compared to the potential human cost, we shouldn't be having to do those hypotheticals. We really shouldn't. Now, for Bernie Sanders, last night didn't go great. Let's keep it real. And we don't know for sure exactly what's going to happen. I can say that even as the results were coming in last night, like you had Claire McCaskill, former Democratic senator, she was on the news saying this thing is done, Bernie Sanders got to drop out. And if you spent any time on social media in the last day, you've probably seen any number of tweets like that, both from random Biden supporters who are saying, it's long past time for him to drop out. Surrogates for the Biden campaign are saying, how dare he stay in? So that is definitely going around. Now, at the end of the day, it's on Bernie Sanders. I'm sure that he's assessing the math and the polls going forward. The actual, the delegate gap between them is a couple of hundred. Now, that doesn't seem huge, but we do have to bear in mind that means that in every future contest, the farther you are behind, the bigger the gap needs to be in your favor for the remaining contests. I think I've seen estimates that he would have to win about 60 or slightly more than 60% of all delegates going forward. Now, that is not impossible, certainly not impossible, but it is difficult, especially when the gap so far in the last week or two has been generally pretty negative towards Bernie. And so I'm sure he's going to be looking at that. He's going to be looking at the polls of the states coming forward. And remember, thankfully, some other states that weren't voting on Tuesday, they did delay their elections. And so staying in means staying in for some time, because we're not going to have a lot of these elections for the next at least a month, possibly longer. You could have more cancellations soon. And so all of this is going to be factored in to what Bernie Sanders and his team are probably literally having a conversation about right now. Thank you, Gabby. I saw that. Now let's talk about one thing that has been going around on Twitter as we were doing our prep to go forward with this stream. There was a Sanders campaign email. I want to read you just a few excerpts from it. I got it. You guys probably got it as well. They said, "No sugarcoating it. Last night did not go the way we wanted. And while our campaign has won the battle of ideas, we are losing the battle over electability to Joe Biden. Bernie and Jane are going to get on a plane back to Vermont. Once there, they'll begin holding conversations with supporters to get input and assess the path forward for our campaign. We will keep you updated as those conversations progress. In the meantime, please continue to stay safe, and thank you for everything you've done so far. It means the world to Bernie and Jane." So look, just from the text of that is not "we're staying in no matter what," which is, by the way, early yesterday, the message that was coming out from the Bernie campaign saying that this is, regardless of what happens today, this is not going to be the end of the campaign. I think that they're probably less in that direction right now. Now, they're right before we went live, Axios, like some people were saying that Axios was reporting that he had dropped out. That was, at least as of the time that we're filming this, that was not true. It was that he had dropped his Facebook advertising or something like that, which is not the same thing. Now, it could be related. Generally, if you're going to cancel your campaign, you're probably going to cancel the advertising too. And a lot of people noticed that in that email I just read for you, it did not end with a donate button, which is generally what they do. I think it led to basically an overview of Bernie Sanders' response on coronavirus, what should be done there. And so, look, both of those are hints that hypothetically this might not go forward. And so we have to prepare ourselves for that. I mean, look, Bernie Sanders, obviously, even if he doesn't think that he can become the nominee, he wants to make sure that, like in 2016, he pushes the party and the eventual nominee in the right direction. And while Biden and his team might not like that, staying in does probably provide more, a better position to do that from. More delegates, more people who voted for him. And look, we already know what percentage of the population supports Bernie Sanders. In nationwide polls, it's 50-50 with Joe Biden, which is why these results, I think, feel so absurd. But I don't know for sure. Look, I would guess that there's probably a pretty good chance that they suspend the campaign. And in particular, one thing that I brought up on our coverage last night that bothers me so fundamentally is some pressure is being put on him to do this because of the fact that we're in a pandemic. Because in the same way that they said a couple days ago, we have to go forward with the voting, we can't let this shut things down because they thought that it would be good for Joe Biden. You can expect that all of those voices are going to be saying, we want to shut this thing down, but the only way we can do that is if Bernie Sanders drops out. And the thing is, honestly, Bernie Sanders is such a good person that sort of pressure is probably going to be somewhat effective on him. He's not going to want his supporters to expose themselves. And so, look, I'm not saying that will be the deciding factor, but I do think that's one thing that they might consider as we go forward. incredibly frustrating. Look, I see some comments about Joe Biden's VP. Look, if Bernie suspends his candidacy, we will certainly get to that. Maybe I'll have Emma on. We'll do a top 10 list or something like that. Personally, I'm not ready to go there just yet. I need like another day or something. I don't know. But look, we're going to be looking to, I believe they're going to be announcing something later on today. So we will certainly be following that. Perhaps in a later video on today, we can talk about that. But as of right now, that's what's going on with Bernie Sanders. They're, I'm sure, having a tough conversation in the middle of an incredibly difficult situation. I don't envy them the position that they've been put in. But I do expect that Bernie Sanders will do what he thinks is best for the movement going forward. In terms of the actual results, last night was rough for Bernie Sanders, big night for Joe Biden. Once you jump into the particular issues, like diving into the exit polls, there is some good news there in terms of what people think about individual policies. But the unfortunate thing, and we're going to demonstrate that here today, is that the connection between what people think of individual policies and who they actually voted for seems to be nothing, basically. There's almost no connection there. So let me give you some examples. Now, overall, good news. Sunrise Movement tweeted last night, 92% of Illinois Dem voters supported a Green New Deal. Let's celebrate all those that came out to vote for a Green New Deal, even despite the fear and confusion held today around coronavirus. Let's also recognize and respect all the GND voters that made the hard decision of staying home. Look, I agree with Sunrise Movement there. And look, I've loved to see in these exit polls, not just in Illinois, but in states throughout this process, that the overwhelming majority of Democratic voters are supportive of a Green New Deal. That is good news. That does not mean, though, that they are taking that and then voting for the person who actually wants to institute a Green New Deal, rather than someone who's like occasionally making a reference to it, but doesn't even seem to fundamentally understand what the policy is about, and certainly won't prioritize it like the Sunrise Movement wants to. And we're seeing that with Joe Biden. But it's not just the Green New Deal. So here's exit polls. I believe these are for Florida. Yes, Florida. So, do you favor or oppose changing the healthcare system so that all Americans get their health insurance from a single government plan instead of private health insurance? So, a fundamental switchover, eliminating private health insurance, go to a single-payer healthcare system. For people who favor that, they went for Biden 58-29. Biden's not going to do that. Biden has been vigorously opposed to that, not only through his entire life, his entire career, but has been attacking Bernie Sanders at every single debate viciously, and I would say dishonestly, about what that would actually entail. And yet people who have made that decision that, like we need to fundamentally change healthcare provision here in the United States, they still went massively for Biden. And of course, people who oppose that went 72 for Biden to 8 for Bernie Sanders. So those people seem to understand exactly who their champion was, and they voted accordingly. But people who want to change over to Medicare for All or some other form of single-payer healthcare, a lot of them still ended up voting for Biden. Next one. Do you favor or oppose the government canceling student loan debt for most people? So look, that is something that Bernie Sanders talks about. I'm sure Biden would do something. Is he in favor of just eliminating it entirely? No. But people who favor that voted for Biden 60-27 for Bernie Sanders. Like, but so you say you want that. Do you prioritize it at all? Is it not in any way informing who you actually vote for? Now, I wish we could cross-reference all of these for people who support both switching over the healthcare system and eliminating student debt to find out if they're still going for Biden. I don't know for sure, but I would say that considering these gaps, they almost certainly are. And again, people who oppose canceling student loan debt, they went for Biden 69-12 for Bernie Sanders. So again, those people did seem to understand where Biden came down on the issue. Unfortunately, the people who favor elimination, they didn't seem to vote like it. One of the most frustrating results, I referenced this on last night's coverage. Who do you trust more to handle Social Security? Like, the Biden gets 87% of people who support, like if you support Biden, he gets like, oh my God. Like one of the things that's most frustrating about this is that like on single payer healthcare, I think the fact that Biden, like he was talking about his plan to some extent, I think that people should have been educated about that, who actually is for Medicare for All and who's not. On that one though, who actually knows where Biden stands on that? I mean, look, if you've been watching online news, if you've been watching the Damage Report, TYT, you've seen all the videos. You know exactly what Biden has had to say about Social Security, stretching back literally decades. He's been pretty consistent in saying that, look, if things get tough, we got to cut it. That's what he's been saying. And yet, on the debate stage, he denied that. Fact checkers seemed at best indifferent to establishing the truth on this issue for voters. I didn't see the mainstream media talking about it virtually at all. And so is it any wonder that people that prioritize the protection of Social Security still ended up going for Biden? They were deceived, unfortunately, by the media and by Biden's campaign. When Bernie Sanders, of course, not only wants to protect it, but also wants to indeed expand it. And here's the thing. My frustration overall, the reason I'm showing you these is it seems to me, for me, maybe for you, feel free to let me know in the comments, that if a candidate has the same position as you on the most important issues, the most impactful issues, that if they were to become president, they would focus their presidency on, that you would then support that person, and that you probably would not go for someone who represents effectively a complete denial, a rejection of your priorities. And yet, that is indeed what people are doing. And I'm seeing references to malarkey in there. In the chat, yeah, people are obviously prioritizing something else, and I have a couple of ideas of what that might be. In response to the question, how important is each of the following qualities in the Democratic nominee for president can beat Donald Trump? If people said that was important, they voted for Biden 63-23 for Bernie Sanders. If they said it wasn't important, they voted for Biden still, but it's a much smaller gap, 37-29 for Bernie Sanders. So for people who, like, that is the one thing, the driving thing, overwhelming support for Joe Biden. Even in Florida, where they're much more supportive of him, if they're not prioritizing that as much, it is a very close ballgame. And look, I've said a million times, there's no point going through all of why I think that if that is what you prioritize, you should be even more supportive of Bernie Sanders. But clearly he won that messaging war with a huge assist from the mainstream media to convince people that he is indeed the electable one. It seems absurd to me, but clearly a lot of people absorbed that. And here's another awesome one. I don't think this is an exit poll, like a bit of information that a lot of people are going to focus on, but asked, should the next president's policies, and they give them a few options, and depending on the option, I'll tell you how supportive of Biden they were. If it's be more liberal than Obama's, they actually go for Sanders, 47-41 for Biden. So if they want more liberal policies, they go for Bernie Sanders. If they want to return to Obama's policies, they go for Biden, 69-10 for Sanders. And that, at the end of the day, I think is what's driving a lot of this. People, hypothetically, they have some preferences in terms of policies, but for a lot of them, they've been sold a bill of goods about electability, and they just kind of want to go back to Obama's policies. Look, the question is, go back to his policies, but I think that for a lot of people, they just think, go back to Obama. It's a disaster. Every day has been horrendous. We need to just go back to things. And with Joe Biden, that is what he's been promising them. Dude talks about Obama more than he talks about himself. His ads feature more photos of Obama than they feature of him. And unfortunately for a lot of people, that has that in combination with the fact that the media has been, incredibly dishonest about what Bernie Sanders plans to do, and also has been at best indifferent to Biden's actual voting record, his positions on the issues, that in some of these states has been enough to carry Biden through. And effectively very similar to the results that we saw with Hillary Clinton back in 2016. So, look, there is good news here. Let's not forget that people do generally support the issues that we talk about every single day, and at some point that is going to bear fruit. The job is not done for us, though. We do have to continue to evangelize, so to speak, about those issues, but we have to get people to actually prioritize them and to know that those are the sorts of issues that not only move the country in the right direction if you implement them, but get politicians elected in the first place. We have to get people to understand that in a general election, those are things that make you electable. They're not some sort of anchor on you. They're what's going to propel you to the win. Unfortunately, we have to do a lot more work on that. Donald Trump, in his ever-evolving response to coronavirus, has had a lot of misses. He might have had one of his first hits today, and that is when he announced this, quote, "The Department of Housing and Urban Development is providing immediate relief to renters and homeowners by suspending all foreclosures and evictions until the end of April." And not long after, we got some actual details about how that is going to work in practice. The Federal Housing Finance Agency also ordered Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac to suspend foreclosures and evictions for any single-family mortgages they back for at least 60 days. That's according to the agency today. And so, look, we don't know all the details. And I will just caution you that a number of the different things that Trump has announced in the past week or so have not turned out to be quite what he sold them as. The rollout of the Google screening website, turns out that's a long way off. It's not ready to go. The drive-through testing places in Walmart parking lots, turns out that's not going to happen anytime soon, unfortunately. And he got a lot of good coverage for it. I mean, there's the thing about the Comfort Hospital ship and all of that. So take all of this with a grain of salt. But in dark times, I do want to give him credit if he makes the right move. And recently, we have seen not only a lot of calls for an end to evictions, foreclosures, things like that, but some states and cities starting to do that. Now, to the extent that the numbers that HUD is involved in, if they actually do that, that will be significant because while obviously the health effects of coronavirus are devastating, we also have to worry about the economic effect. Many more people than will get coronavirus will be negatively impacted by the inability to travel, the loss of their jobs, and all of that. And for many of those people, the possibility of going bankrupt, losing their home, that is a significant threat. So hopefully they're serious about this. We have a bit more from the Federal Housing Authority head, Mark Calabria, who said, "As a reminder, borrowers affected by the coronavirus who are having difficulty paying their mortgage should reach out to their mortgage servicers as soon as possible," which is obviously good advice in this case. I would say in general, if there is an area of your life, especially one with a significant financial possible set of consequences, you should get on top of that while you can and make sure that you're communicating with people who manage your money, your house, your insurance, your kids' schools, all of that. You're not going to want to be sort of caught unawares by what's going on. So that's true. Now, aside from this one change, which seems like a positive one, Republican senators are apparently close to reaching an agreement on the details of the $1 trillion stimulus plan, according to two GOP sources that talked to CNN. A package that one Treasury memo suggests could include a combined $500 billion in checks to Americans to address the economic impact of the coronavirus. So I know we've been getting a lot of comments asking us to update all of you on those particular bills that are being bandied about. And one of the reasons it's difficult to do that is because there are multiple bills, they change quite frequently, and we don't know which have any chance of actually being passed. So this is different than the House bill that we have talked about. In this case, those numbers are different that we've talked about in the past. So something like $1 trillion, I have heard that number thrown around, not necessarily with half of it going to regular Americans in the form of checks. And so that's another area where I would say huge grain of salt. I'd previously heard that something like $850 billion will be going in bailouts to a number of different industries, and expect that list of industries to probably continue to grow as time goes on. We knew that some of it would be going to actual workers in the form of some sort of individual stimulus. I don't know for sure exactly what the breakdown is going to be, but we have been tracking that a lot of people on both sides of the aisle have now been talking about some form of at least limited UBI, and so that is probably going to be, hopefully, a big portion of this. It looked like it was going to be like 15% of the bill before, maybe it's up to 50%. But the thing is, a lot of it is going to come down to who's actually in charge of the amount. I mean, you had like Kamala Harris talking about $500, and then you have plans all the way up to $6,000 a month. I don't know where Trump is going to come out on that. Maybe it'll be 1,000. And we know that a lot of Republican senators aren't a fan of doing literally anything right now. They've been digging their heels in. And even Mitch McConnell, he was saying that they should just sort of gag it down and pass something. That doesn't give me a lot of faith necessarily, but at least Republicans are considering doing something. I would say do it as quickly as possible, both to reassure regular people, many of whom are stuck at home like you and me, and they're wondering what's going to happen. It will also have the secondary effect, probably, of providing a little bit of reassurance to, the stock market, which is continuing to plummet even today. We hit that circuit breaker yet again. And yeah, as someone's pointing out, the airlines are almost certainly going to be bailed out, but probably, casinos, restaurants, a number of different industries that are going to be really horribly impacted by the fact that people can't gather, and that might stretch for some time. More details on that in the future. one of the things we've been talking about for some time is the fact that while we believe that for literally months now we should be doing something about coronavirus, in recent weeks, Fox News and now more elected Republicans have landed on, okay, maybe we'll do something. Maybe. But can we get in a few references to this being a Chinese virus? And so, look, we've shown you all the times that the various Fox News and Fox Business people have done it. We also had this yesterday. We showed you this tweet from reporter Weijia Zhang, who said, "This morning, a White House official referred to coronavirus as the Kung flu to my face. Makes me wonder what they're calling it behind my back." And so now we can go to Kellyanne Conway, who was asked about that earlier today.
I'd like to know.
Rather than having
excuse me, that's been alleged. No, Yamiche, excuse me.
So is that wrong? Is it
Yamiche, I'm not dealing in hypotheticals. Of course it's wrong. But you can't just make an accusation and not tell us who it is. Who is it? Come and tell us. Yamiche, if you want to argue, I'm going to argue about standing away from each other and washing our hands and everything.
But just
tell us who it is.
You're telling those staffers, of course it's wrong.
Who was it? Tell us. I think we have. I think.
You understand how these conversations go.
I don't know. I don't know how these conversations go. And that's highly offensive, so you should tell us all who it is. I'd like to know who it is. I'm not going to engage in hypotheticals. I'm married to an Asian. I mean, I'm not engaging in hypotheticals. My kids are, partly. Yes, I'm married to an Asian American. My kids are 25% Filipino. You're also obsessed. I thought you knew.
But you're saying that using that term
excuse me, of course it is, but who is it? Yamiche, who is it? Now you're engaging. I'm trying to be here to help you help America understand how to slow the spread. And you're shouting at me in a way about something that somebody allegedly said to somebody else. And I'm asking, who was it? Why don't we go to the... Excuse me, that...
Okay, so I think you've probably heard enough of her. So somebody, Johnny B. Good commented, "I have black friends," which is effectively sort of what she did right there. So here's the thing. I understand that, in comparison to actually doing something about this sort of concern to many people is going to seem peripheral at best. I would say for the people who have already had their businesses devastated by xenophobia and bigotry, who have been the targets of personal harassment and even attacks, I don't think it's a peripheral concern to those people. And people in America who are Chinese or who might be believed to be Chinese have already faced this sort of discrimination. And it's only going to get worse. Like, let's get really real with each other. It is, this is the Apocalypse Report. We've had a little bit over 100 people die in America so far. If it gets to 1,000 or 10,000 or 100,000, the sorts of racists that are spitting at Asian people in the streets or yelling slurs at them, how do you think they're going to respond when it gets worse? And along the way, they're being told every day, the reason people are dying is because of something China. Honestly. I'm being totally serious with you. I get that a number of racists online are going to try to brush away the concerns that I'm expressing right now as oh, this is serious and you're worried about somebody saying Kung flu. Well, yeah. If it inspires racists to attack people, to potentially kill people, I'm worried about it. And I'm worried about nipping it in the bud so that we don't go another couple months with this and then rack up, another needless death toll. I would say that that's pretty important, actually. And Kellyanne Conway didn't treat it like it was important. She pretended that the fact that she is married to, a guy who's half Filipino, that means that if she doesn't care about it, it's still serious. Like, she's still being a serious person. She's not. And Trump was a little better. So we're going to transition to him right now. Let's see if this video plays.
My second question is, there are at least one White House official who used the term Kung flu, referring to the fact that this virus started in China. Is that acceptable? Is it wrong? Are you worried that having this virus be talked about as a Chinese virus, that might...
I wonder who said that. You know who said that?
I'm not sure the person's name, but would you condemn the fact
say
that
the term again?
A person at the White House used the term Kung flu. My question is, do you think that's wrong? Kung flu. And do you think using the term Chinese virus, that puts Asian Americans at risk, that people might target them?
No. I think they probably would agree with it 100%. It comes from China. There's nothing not to agree. Okay, how about last question?
Okay, so I am going to extend him more goodwill than he probably deserves and assume that when he says, I think they would probably agree with me, that he's talking about his reference to the Chinese virus rather than Kung flu specifically. Can't say for sure it is Donald Trump, but that's probably what he means. And that is just about as Trumpy a thing as I can imagine. So refuses to even disavow the fact that this like oddly unnecessary, bizarre, racist joke is being used by White House officials, and then implies that no, the people who will be the victims of harassment and possibly assault, they would agree with me. They like my strategy of needlessly, willingly choosing to call it this thing that we decided like 2 weeks ago we're going to call it. And it wasn't just here. On Twitter, he tweeted earlier today, "I always treated the Chinese virus very seriously, and have done a very good job from the beginning, including my very early decision to close the borders from China against the wishes of almost all. Many lives were saved, the fake news, blah, blah, blah." There's a lot that's an issue there. The fact that he immediately is once again congratulating himself. Like, honestly, in literally anything, like... So I wanted to play that video, and I successfully played it. Imagine if for the next 2 years I talked about how awesome a job I did by playing that video. And just over and over and over and over again was asking you to congratulate me for how great of a job I've done. And in fact, even the experts didn't think I could play that video. They were all wrong. I played it. Wouldn't I seem like a weird person? But obviously, more importantly, it's the "I always treated the Chinese virus very seriously." It's a lie. He spun his wheels for literally months, and that has put us in the position that we're in. But the choosing to call it that. They didn't call it that 6 weeks ago. They chose to start doing it. And I've seen a lot of racists and closet racists on Twitter saying, look at this. People are dying, and this is what they're choosing to focus on. The left is concerned about this. That's very clever. It's very clever to do that little sleight of hand. Okay, I've got a little jujitsu move for you too. People are dying and you're choosing to make racist jokes rather than actually confront the situation that we're in, largely due to inaction on the part of the people who were tasked with protecting us. That seems weirder, I think. Being concerned about racism, not as weird as being racist, especially when people are already dying. But look, let's keep it real about why this is happening. It's not just casual racism. I mean, that's why his fans like it. They will always say, on the one hand, he's not a racist. On the other hand, we love when he says racist things. No, this is to protect his own reputation. He's calling it the Chinese virus over and over and over again, and Fox News is going to say it more and more and more, and you're going to see more and more tweets about that, because as the situation gets worse here, literally the last thing they want is for you to be angry at the government for not having done more. And so they're going to pull the first, last, and only trick in the book, which is get the American people to hate someone overseas, and that will allow us to, get by without having done anything to improve the lives of regular working Americans. I mean, is that not it? Is that not what's going on? They're going to call it the Chinese virus because they don't want you to think about the fact that it has been spreading inside of our borders because we have not been testing people. It's been spread by Americans to Americans because the American government didn't do what it needed to do. But Chinese virus. Kung flu over there. It's a viral squirrel. That's all it is. But we can walk and chew gum. We can deal with both of those at the same time. Phase 1 of protecting Donald Trump's reputation is continually calling it the Chinese virus and getting you to think that the issue is the people of China, not Donald Trump. Phase 2 is trying to get you to wrap yourself and him in a gigantic flag, okay? Rallying around patriotism, nationalism, whatever you want it to be. And we have an example of that from earlier today.
Consider America to be on a wartime footing in terms of fighting this virus?
I do. I actually do. I'm looking at it that way because, if it got out of control, the big thing we did was a very early stoppage of people coming in who could be very, very heavily infected. That was a very good move, and it was very early, very, very early, when most people, including a lot of professionals, they didn't want us to do it. That really saved a lot of lives. And yeah, I look at it, I view it as in a sense, a wartime president. I mean, that's what we're fighting. I mean, it's a very tough situation. You have to do things. You have to close parts of an economy that 6 weeks ago were the best they've ever been. We had the best economy we've ever had, and then one day you have to close it down in order to defeat this enemy. And but we're doing it, and we're doing it well. And I'll tell you, the American people have been incredible. For the most part, they've been really incredible. Yeah, please, Kate.
Okay, so, yes, it's a war situation. He's a wartime president. Look, here's the thing. we can identify why he's doing this, that he wants you to be less critical of him going forward, but especially to forget what you've already seen, how his, the fact that he's entirely incurious, incompetent, that he already shut down the pandemic disaster relief team 2 years ago, that he just waited until now. Hopefully they're doing something. He doesn't want you to remember that. That's why. That doesn't mean that it's not in some ways true. Like, I know I'm supposed to have Trump derangement syndrome, but I'll say objectively, obviously, we are in a situation that is going to have an effect on our lives and on the economy that will be more extreme than any of the wars we've been in recently. I'm going back literally decades, so that is certainly true. And that's one of the reasons why when people are sort of speculating about what effect this disaster could have on the election, they're wondering, like, how bad is this going to be for Trump? And I say, I don't know that it's necessarily going to be bad for him at all. Even if it's disastrous and even if he was incompetent, people generally do stick with their president when there's a crisis. But I do think that to the extent that it's true is fine. He is going to play it up so much. And you're seeing that. It was in multiple references there, not just to the wartime president, but the enemy. We have to track down the enemy. And he said this earlier. I call it the unseen enemy. There's 1,000 different terms for it, but it's snuck up on us, and it's in 128 countries. I think it's in something like that. Very close to that. I think of that. So it spreads violently. It's a very contagious, very, very contagious virus for America to be on a wartime footing in terms of fighting this virus. So, look, it's buffoonish, and it's rambling and stumbling, but he does continually call it an enemy. I will say, one of the most vicious lies is it snuck up on us. It did not sneak up on us. It was screaming out of China week after week after week after week, and then it spread to Japan, to South Korea, and to Vietnam, and all the countries in the region, and still screaming. And Trump was, what? It's going to be fine. We got 15, soon it's going to be 0, and it's going to go away as soon as it gets hot, and I'm hearing April, and it's just going to wash through, and everybody relax, don't panic, and it's going to go away. It's going to go away. And while he was saying all of that week after week, it was apparently sneaking up on us as the number of infections went up into the tens of thousands. That was sneaking. It wasn't wearing its sneakers, though. It was still a little bit squeaky, a little bit loud. We heard it coming. I mean, how many videos did we do on the damage report? Week after week after week about it. But it stuck up on him. Maybe his hearing isn't as good as he wants you to believe it is. And bear in mind, for context, Trump's remarks earlier today came as the count of coronavirus cases in the U.S. surpassed 7,000. The virus has spread to all 50 states and Washington, D.C., and the number of domestic deaths as a result of the outbreak reached 100 on Tuesday. That was yesterday. It's going to be higher today. And the number of cases is going to be higher. It's going to be higher both because it's spreading, but also, more importantly, and you need to understand, because we're doing more testing. We're still not doing the testing that we should, but we are doing more. And so that number rising, as I said a few days ago on the show, is not necessarily horrible news, because at the very least we're identifying these cases. Every case where they identify it is a case that hypothetically they can quarantine that person and give them treatment so that they don't infect others and that they survive this thing. That same person would have been, infected still if we hadn't checked them, but they would be out there going about their lives at risk to themselves and to others. And so that number is going up, and we have an absolute racist buffoon of a president in charge of the response. But hopefully we're doing more now. More places are locking down. It's not yet a nationwide lockdown, but I would not rule out the possibility. We're starting to respond to this, but I do think that hypothetically, if we really want to get the numbers down, if we want to flatten the curve as much as possible, if we want to save as many lives as possible, we will probably have to do far more. And that so far does not seem to have gotten through to Donald Trump, unfortunately. Thanks for listening to the full episode of The Damage Report. Support our work, listen ad-free, access members-only bonus content, and more by subscribing to Apple Podcasts at apple.co/TYT. I'm your host, John Adarola. I'll see you soon.